war that saw two great powers struggle for dominance. But destiny had already chosen its champion. In 493 AD, Theodoric, the Ostrogothic king, finally overpowered Odoacer. In a banquet intended for peace, Theodoric unsheathed his sword and with a swift stroke ended Odoacer's reign and life. The victor Theodoric sat on the throne as the king of Italy. But unlike the conquerors of old, he did not ravage and ruin. Instead, he sought harmony, coexistence, and the preservation of Roman traditions. The laws of Rome were respected, its citizens were treated with dignity, and a sense of peace and prosperity filled the air. Christianity wasn't just a tool of the Romans, it was infiltrating Europe. Many leaders were skeptical, not knowing what to make of this new god. Clovis I from the Frankish kingdom took a page from Constantine's playbook. And in the Battle of Tobiac in 496 against the Alemanni, Clovis prayed to the Christian god and promised if he won the war, he would convert to Christianity. The Franks easily won the battle, and Clovis kept his promise by converting himself and his country to Catholicism. Though they may have believed in the same god, Byzantium had a different interpretation. Justinian I decided to rebrand Eastern Rome from the legacy of Rome and created the new Empire of Byzantium. Under Justinian's rule, the Byzantine Empire underwent a process of reconquest and expansion. His most famous military commander, Belisarius, led successful campaigns to reclaim lost territories in the west. The most significant achievement was the reconquest of parts of Italy and North Africa, temporarily reuniting the Roman Empire under Byzantine rule. In addition to military and legal reforms, Justinian was involved in architectural projects. He sponsored the construction of numerous impressive buildings, including the famous Hagia Sophia in Constantinople. This grand cathedral, renowned for its stunning architecture and intricate mosaics, symbolized Byzantine power and Christian piety. While back in Italy in 568, the Germanic tribe of the Lombards under King Alboin invaded Italy. The Lombards gradually carved out their kingdom through a series of strategic campaigns. They captured cities and strongholds, established duchies, and extended their control over vast northern and central Italy. The Lombard kingdom became a powerful political entity in the region, with Pavia as its capital. However, it is essential to note that the Lombards did not wholly eradicate the existing Roman and Byzantine structures. They incorporated Roman governance and administration elements into their system, blending Germanic and Roman traditions. The Lombard kings allowed Roman aristocrats to retain some of their lands and privileges, seeking to stabilize their rule and ensure the productivity of the land. However, Jesus wasn't the only prophet anymore. In the lands of the Middle East, a prophet named Muhammad founded the religion of Islam. Under the will of their prophet, they've all set their eyes on Europe. General Tariq ibn Ziyad of the Umayyad Caliphate led an expedition across the Strait of Gibraltar, landing in southern Hispania with an army of Berber and Arab soldiers. The Visigothic kingdom, weakened by internal divisions and a succession crisis, was ill-prepared to face the disciplined and well-organized Muslim forces. Tariq ibn Ziyad swiftly advanced, encountering little resistance from the disunited Visigothic nobility. In the Battle of Guadalete, Tariq ibn Ziyad led his forces against the Visigothic army commanded by King Roderick. The battle proved a decisive turning point, resulting in a resounding victory for the Muslim forces. King Roderick was killed in the battle, further destabilizing the Visigothic leadership and creating the beginning of an Islamic Spain. The Lombards, though, were tired of the excellent control of the papacy. Being threatened by military action, Pope Stephen II pleaded with Frankish King Pepin the Short for military aid against the Lombards. Motivated by his ambitions and the desire to strengthen the Frankish influence in Italy, Pepin agreed to support the papacy's cause. In 754, Pepin led a Frankish army into Italy, launching a military campaign against the Lombards. The war between the Franks and the Lombards lasted for several years. Pepin's forces confronted the Lombards in numerous battles, gradually pushing them back and weakening their hold over the Italian territories. The decisive battle occurred at Pavia, the Lombard capital, where the Frankish army achieved a significant victory, leading to the demise of the Lombards. Feeling generous, Pepin the Short gave the papacy a small subsection of land, now known as Vatican City. This act solidified the alliance between the Franks and the papacy. This allowed King Charlemagne, who ascended the throne in 768 with the papal support of the ideals of reuniting Western Rome. Through a series of military campaigns, he expanded the Frankish kingdom, incorporating territories that spanned modern-day France, Germany, Italy, and parts of other European countries. His military successes earned him the title of Emperor of the Carolingian Empire. This realm encompassed much of Western Europe. In 800, Pope Leo III crowned Charlemagne as the Holy Roman Emperor, and his empire was named the Holy Roman Empire. After Charlemagne's death, his son Louis the Pious inherited the empire. As his name suggests, he was very pious, but could not do anything when the Vikings began raids along the Rhine River, causing fear among the public. Why would anyone respect a leader who couldn't keep them safe? So Europeans started to create a system of feudalism in which they relied on the central government for defense, and landowning nobles started to enlist knights and vassals to protect their lands. These lands were worked by serfs, who were tied to their land. These serfs' sole responsibility was to make enough food to feed themselves and the knights, nobles, and kings. Of course, 90% of the population during the feudal eras were serfs, because producing food back then was a labor-intensive grind. After Louis the Pious died in 840, so did the Charlemagne Empire. Just like in the Roman Empire, infighting with the family caused them to split the empire in 3 ways. In the west, Charles the Bald oversaw France. In the east, Louis the German settled the lands of Germany. While in the middle, Lothair was given a middle kingdom that fell instantly, like a house of cards. As the Holy Roman Empire was dividing, the Vikings attacked all across the coasts of Europe. The Vikings pillaged, and pillaged. Then, in 911, King Charles the Simple sought to end the Viking attacks and forge a peaceful relationship with the Vikings in the region. Under the treaty's terms, King Charles granted the Viking leader Rollo the territory of Normandy, which consisted of lands along the northern coast of France. In exchange for the land, Rollo agreed to end his Viking raids and pledge his loyalty to the Frankish king. Rollo also agreed to convert to Christianity and was baptized in the treaty. For the first time, the Vikings had a permanent home and a legitimate position within the feudal system. They transitioned from raiders and invaders to landowners and rulers, adopting the customs and language of the region. Though this treaty didn't stop the Vikings from attacking the British Isles. This led King Athelstan of Essex to gain troops from the rest of the Isles to protect them from the incoming Vikings, led by Olaf Godfredsson of Norse Dublin. As Athelstan won the battle, he united England, making him to be the first king of a united England, and so began one of the longest monarchies in history. While in the East Frankish kingdom, Otto I wanted to follow in the quest of Charlemagne and create a united Rome once again. In the Battle of Lechfeld of 955, Otto beat the pagan Magyars. Then in 961, he led an army to Italy, recapturing land from all of the pagan kingdoms. Then in 962, Otto I was coronated to Pope John XII in Rome as the new Holy Roman Emperor. In 987, the West Frankish kingdom was on the verge of turmoil. King Louis V died at age 20 without leaving an heir to take over their dynasty, leaving the French monarchy in peril. So the French aristocracy had an election between Hugh Capet, a noble with extensive lands in the region of Isle-de-France, and Charles, Duke of Lower Lorraine. Through Capet's marital ties and high-powered friends, Hugh won the election and became France's first king. While the word of Christ was going strong, the beliefs in France and the Holy Roman Empire were utterly different from the ones in Byzantine. They argued over the role of the Pope, what language the Bible should be spoken in, and where the power of religion should lie. In 1054, the division became too big. Papal Legate Humbert of Silva, Canada, representing Pope Leo IX, excommunicated the Patriarch of Constantinople, Michael I Cerularius. In response, Cerularius excommunicated the legate and his associates. This led to a permanent split between the Eastern Orthodox and the Catholic Church. In January 1066, English King Edward the Confessor died without a natural heir, so they crowned Harold Godwinson, the mighty Earl of Wessex, to be king. The only problem, King Edward had already promised it to a man nicknamed William the Bastard from Normandy. When William saw Harold's coronation, he gathered an army and set sail for England. He landed at Pevensey in Sussex and built a fortified camp. Realizing the imminent threat, Harold and his tired troops marched south to face the Normans. On October 14, 1066, the decisive Battle of Hastings occurred in Sussex. The battle was intense, with both sides suffering heavy casualties. Ultimately, Harold was killed, likely by an arrow to the eye, and his forces were defeated. William the Bastard was crowned King of England on Christmas Day 1066, thus establishing Norman rule over England, which caused William to gain the name William the Conqueror, a much more terrifying name than a bastard. While over in non-Europe, the Seljuk Turks took over Jerusalem, pledging the holy city for the Islamic faith and kicking out the Christians. So in 1095, Pope Urban declared that all good Christians must take over Jerusalem's lands. So people across Europe, from France, Italy, Holy Roman Empire, Barcelona, and Constantinople, all came together, and with their collective forces, went to Europe to take over Jerusalem. So in 1099, the Christian forces took over Jerusalem, making it a Christian land again, showing the strength of a united Europe. Of course, 50 years later, the Turks retook Jerusalem. So came the Second Crusade under the leadership of King Louis VII, which failed. King Louis was captured, and most of his army was dead. Then in 1187 came the Third Crusade, when King Richard I of Britain, Emperor Frederick I of the Holy Roman Empire, and King Philip II of France tried the holy city of Jerusalem. Richard was captured, Frederick died, and Philip just left, leaving the Third to be a disaster. Then in 1202, the Fourth Crusade began with the intention of recapturing Jerusalem, but instead they attacked Constantinople. If you hate Constantinople, then the Fourth Crusade was a success. If the goal was to take over Jerusalem, then they failed miserably. While back in England, King John was notorious for his arbitrary rule, heavy taxation, and disregard for the rights and privileges of his subjects, particularly the nobility. As discontent simmered among the barons, a group of rebel leaders, led by the brave and resolute Robert Fitzwater, decided it was time to take a stand against the tyrannical king. With the threat of being killed, King John and Robert Fitzwater began creating a list of rights that everyone would have no matter what. This negotiation period in the summer of 1215 led to the first document to fully captivate your human rights, the Magna Carta. The Magna Carta guarantees that no new taxes unless a common council agrees. All free men have the right to justice and a fair trial with a jury. The monarch doesn't have absolute power. The law is above all men and applies to everyone equally. The Magna Carta was one of the first documents that gave individuals fundamental human rights. Before it, rights were nothing more than what your social class gave you. Now, even the monarch is under the same set of laws as a peasant. As England gave people rights, Europe went through not one but 4 more crusades. And guess what? They've all ended in failure. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing repeatedly and expecting a different result. The crusades were definitely insane. As a direct result of the Crusades, Europe soon found herself in a vulnerable position. Their best armies were busy fighting in the Middle East, leaving much of the European countryside defenseless and without its best commanders. Also, the kingdoms of Central Europe had become fragmented and splintered as the Catholic Church attempted to wage war against the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II. This meant that in 1223, Europe stood largely ununited, undefended, and unprepared for what was coming. The sound of 1,000 horses rumbled in the distance. The Golden Horde had reached Europe. The Mongol invasion of Europe began with the arrival of Mongol troops near modern-day Mariupol in Ukraine. They were victorious at the Battle of Kalka River in 1223, but halted their advance. They would spend the next 2 decades razing Russian and Ukrainian villages while establishing a sphere of influence over the area. In 1240, the Mongols sacked their first major European city, Kiev, beginning their invasion of Central Europe in earnest. The armies of Khadan and Batu Khan, 2 grandsons of Genghis Khan, launched a 2-pronged attack into modern-day Poland. They defeated a combined European army at the Battle of Legnica in 1241, and then crushed a Hungarian force at the Battle of Mohi just a few months later. The horde continued to push further into Central Europe, razing villages in Saxony, Bohemia, and Moravia as they went. Croatia, Austria, and Bulgaria all faced the wrath of the Khans and their nomadic soldiers before the year was over. But unlike in Asia, the Mongols were unsuccessful in exerting any real influence over the region. While they mounted raids, burned villages, defeated armies, and looted at will, they never overthrew any regimes or held power in any discernible way. They also never overthrew any major city, as European defenses were able to repel the Mongols on a number of occasions. Mongolian control was almost exclusively consigned to the sparsely populated countryside, and not much else. By the winter of 1241, the Mongol horde would begin its withdrawal from Europe and made their long ride back to Mongolia. Historians don't agree on what exactly spurred this decision, but a leading theory points to the death of Genghis Khan's third son, the great Ogode Khan. Mongolian tradition dictates that all the princes of the blood who led the Mongolian armies were required to be present for the election of the next great Khan, and so they returned to honor their birthright, leaving Europe. For now, Europe was safe, but without a common enemy to unite them, the kingdoms of Europe fell right back to doing what it did best, waging war against one another. Issues with bureaucracy and who should take over the crown still weren't over in 1337, as the last direct descendant of Charlemagne, King Charles V, died without an heir. Two candidates for who should be the next king emerged and demanded the throne: King Edward of England and Philip VI. King Edward argued that he was the next closest relative because all the royals were obsessed with Charlemagne. However, King Philip IV saw this as an insult to French sovereignty. Since Philip was closer to the paternal side, he declared himself to be a righteous king. The French coronated Philip because they didn't want the English king to rule over them. So, Edward led his forces from England to France and began a 100-year war. Just as the 100 Years' War began, a nasty disease called the Black Death emerged. The Black Death, or bubonic plague, caused painful swellings called buboes that appeared all over the victims' bodies. The disease was caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis, which was spread by fleas that infested rats. Around 75 to 200 million people died, leaving Europe in a dark age. Farms were left uncultivated, economic systems collapsed, and trade was practically non-existent. The persistent presence of death influenced art, literature, and religious beliefs. Grim depictions of skeletons, danse macabre, and memento mori became prevalent, serving as reminders of life's transience. The plague also spurred a spiritual and existential crisis, with people questioning their faith and seeking answers through religious practices and sincere devotion. However, the plague inadvertently brought about some positive changes amidst the darkness. The reduced population led to increased social mobility for those who survived, as labor became scarce and demand for skilled workers rose. The devastation also paved the way for advancements in medicine and public health practices, as people sought to understand and combat the disease. In times of darkness, there is always a light, but before there can be a light, wars must be fought. Under the banner of Edward III, the English forces embarked on a bold campaign, determined to seize the French crown. Their first taste of victory came at the Battle of Crécy, where English longbowmen unleashed a storm of arrows upon the French knights, securing a resounding triumph. Encouraged by this early success, the English pressed on, their sights set on the glittering prize of Paris. But France would not yield easily. Led by the courageous Philip VI and later his son John II, the French forces rallied to defend their homeland. At the Battle of Poitiers in 1356, the tide turned in favor of the English once more. The indomitable Black Prince, Edward's son, captured John II, leaving the French king a captive in his enemy's hands. With the famous Battle of Agincourt in 1415, the English achieved a glorious triumph against overwhelming odds. The young king seemed destined to rule both kingdoms as he married Catherine of Valois and signed the Treaty of Troyes, securing his claim to the French throne. But hope never fades in the hearts of the oppressed. Inspired by her religious visions and a burning sense of patriotism, a simple peasant girl named Joan emerged as a beacon of hope for France. Joan of Arc, clad in armor and wielding a banner of courage, led the French forces to remarkable victories. Her determination and unwavering faith breathed new life into the downtrodden French. The French recaptured city after city with Joan's guidance, including the legendary Orléans. However, Joan's life was short-lived because in 1430 she was captured by the British and executed for being a witch. Finally, in 1453, the curtain fell on this long and bloody chapter. The Battle of Castillon climaxed the 100 Years' War as the French delivered a final, resounding blow to the retreating English. The war-weary land of France celebrated its hard-fought victory, reclaiming its territories and identity. 1453 was a big year for wars on the European continent. In Asia, the Ottoman Turks were gearing up to take over the declining Byzantine Empire and the famous city of Constantinople. Sultan Mehmed II led an army of 80,000 soldiers, including elite Janissary troops and a powerful artillery force, to besiege Constantinople. The Byzantine defenders, led by Emperor Constantine XI, were faced with a nearly impossible task: holding off the Ottoman assault. The Ottomans bombarded the city with artillery for nearly 2 months, gradually destroying the wall. Then, on the fateful day of May 29, 1453, the Ottomans climbed up the wall and infiltrated Constantinople, causing the end of the Byzantine Empire. In 1453, all paths no longer led to Rome, and all trace back to the empire of Caesar was erased. But even though the face of Europe was changing, the continent's domination was still to come. In 1492, Christopher Columbus arrived in the Bahamas, and in 1498, Vasco da Gama reached the port of Calicut, India. Europe was now a truly global continent. Then the light came. The Renaissance and an era of rebirth were upon us. In Florence, Italy, a young artist named Leonardo da Vinci emerged from humble beginnings. Blessed with a keen eye and insatiable curiosity, Leonardo delved into every field imaginable: painting, sculpture, anatomy, engineering, and more. With his brush, he brought the Mona Lisa's enigmatic smile to life, capturing her essence for all of eternity. He dissected the human body keenly, unlocking secrets hidden beneath the skin. Leonardo was a Renaissance man embodying the spirit of boundless creativity and intellectual pursuit. Not far away, in the ethereal city of Rome, Michelangelo Buonarroti chiseled away at blocks of marble, coaxing out sculptures of breathtaking beauty. His masterpiece, the awe-inspiring David, stood tall and proud, symbolizing strength and resilience. Michelangelo's frescoes adorned the Sistine Chapel, where his brushstrokes transformed the ceiling into a celestial realm, teeming with divine figures and biblical stories. His art reflected a harmonious blend of technical skill and emotional depth, embodying the essence of the Renaissance spirit. Meanwhile, in the bustling city of Venice, the Venetian master Titian applied bold and vibrant colors to his canvases, creating vivid portraits and landscapes that captured the imagination. His mastery of color and light breathed life into his subjects, infusing them with a sense of vitality that radiated from the canvas. Titian's art resonated with the viewer's emotions, evoking a deep connection to the human experience. The thirst for knowledge and scientific understanding grew as the Renaissance swept Europe. In the small Polish town of Torun, Nicholas Copernicus peered into the night sky and dared to question the prevailing wisdom. Through careful observation and mathematical calculations, Copernicus proposed a revolutionary idea: the Earth revolved around the Sun. His heliocentric model challenged centuries of belief and laid the foundation for our modern understanding of the universe. However, one Renaissance thinker changed the political landscape of Europe. In 1517, Martin Luther famously posted the 95 Theses on a church in Wittenberg, Germany. Luther's essay had 2 main ideas. 1, the Bible is the central religious authority, and 2, humans may reach salvation only by their faith, and not by their deeds. This mere idea changed how individuals viewed religion. Minor gentry and impoverished agricultural workers saw Protestantism as a way of addressing the social issues caused by the Catholic Church. Back in the time of Luther, being a Catholic was a pay-to-win game. If you pay an indulgence to the church, all your sins will be immediately forgiven. However, if we're all equal in the eyes of God, why should forgiveness be cost-based? Couldn't a peasant be forgiven too? This caused a revolt to spread quickly across different regions of Germany, with peasants forming armed bands and demanding their rights. However, the war came to a quick end when the Catholic forces were able to slaughter the poorly armed peasants. More than 80,000 people died in a war to find God. However, religious freedom is much easier when you're a king. In 1534, King Henry VIII saw an annulment of his marriage to Catherine of Aragon. However, Pope Clement VIII refused, so King Henry VIII created his own church, the Anglican Church, so he can get as many divorces as he wants, though he doesn't. King Henry VIII had 6 wives, but only divorced 2. 1 died of natural causes, 1 survived the king, and 2 others would perish with their heads in a basket. But while Western Europe grappled with its religious identity, the East and large stretches of Central Europe were faced with a wholly different religious threat. From its strongholds in Asia Minor, the Ottoman Empire had begun its expansion into Europe in 1521. In 1521, Suleiman the Magnificent captured Belgrade and conquered most of the kingdoms of Hungary. A few years later, he besieged Vienna, but would fail to take the city. This meant that for now, Ottoman expansion had been halted. In 1539, a 60,000-strong Ottoman army besieged the Spanish garrison at Castelnuovo on the Adriatic coast, forcing the city-state of Venice to agree to a total surrender of its territories in the Aegean and Greece. It's worth noting, however, that the Ottoman presence in Europe wasn't totally unwanted. France united with the Ottomans against their shared enemy of the Habsburgs, and together, the two nations saw great success in the Mediterranean. By 1566, they had a complete monopoly on the eastern Mediterranean, and their empire now stretched over 3 continents. But with this expansion came the horrors and atrocities of the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman slave trade was the lifeblood of their empire. Naval raids across European coastal towns were common, with slaves being taken from the French, Dutch, Italian, English, and even Icelandic coastlines before being transported back to the eastern Mediterranean for sale. But perhaps most brutal was the practice of blood tax that came to proliferate across Eastern and Central Europe. Early one morning along the banks of the Adriatic in modern-day Serbia, a young boy hugged his mother goodbye and climbed onto a horse that would take him to the great city of Constantinople, nearly 1,000 kilometers away. Sent by his family as a tribute hostage, the young child was forced to convert from Christianity to Islam, before being impressed into the Ottoman army as part of a formidable and feared elite fighting unit, the Janissaries. His name was Yerj Kastriati Skanderbeg, and over the next 30 years, he would rise through the ranks and become one of the empire's greatest generals. This practice of child levying was common during Ottoman rule of Europe, and while it promised power to second-rate citizens, it also bred contempt. Skanderbeg is best known today for defecting against his Ottoman rulers and leading a 25-year revolt in Serbia against their conquerors. This was not an isolated incident, and many saw the practice of blood taxing as barbaric and brutal, and it directly contributed to the demonization of Islam in the West. Spain in particular took issue with Ottoman expansion, and the two empires would eventually fight a multi-continental religious war against each other as Christianity and Islam faced off once again. But before all this, the Spanish were busy fighting another religious war, not against Muslims or foreign invaders, but against the English king and his new religion, Protestantism. However, this Protestant behavior was abhorred by King Philip II, who viewed himself as a devout Catholic and defender of the faith. On the other hand, Queen Elizabeth I was a Protestant ruler of England who threatened his religious beliefs. So, Philip sent the famous Spanish Armada toward England. It carried with it the banners of the Catholic Church, symbolizing the divine mission it believed it was undertaking. The sailors, soldiers, and commanders saw themselves as soldiers of God, fighting for the preservation and triumph of their Catholic faith. The clash between the Spanish Armada and the English Navy was, in essence, a religious struggle played out on the high seas. It embodied the deep-rooted religious divisions that permeated Europe during that time. Each side believed that they were fighting for territorial dominance and preserving and propagating their respective religious beliefs. As the Spanish were defeated, it was presumed by the British that this was a triumphant call to the Protestant faith. In the early 1600s, European powers embarked on a quest for new lands and riches. The English settled in Jamestown in Virginia, facing challenges but persevering. The Dutch established trading posts in the East Indies, building a powerful trading empire. The French founded Quebec, venturing into the wilderness for fur trading. The Spanish already had successful colonies in South America, creating wealth for their country. Though religious wars weren't over, in 1618, the Catholics and the Protestants were at it again. Emperor Ferdinand II ascended to the head of the Holy Roman Empire, a vast realm composed of diverse territories. His first actions sent shockwaves through the empire, forcing citizens to adhere to Roman Catholicism, even though many of the territories were Protestant. Like the city of Prague, fueled by a sense of injustice, the Bohemian nobility rose against Ferdinand II's religious edicts. The iconic defenestration of Prague unfolded as his representatives were thrown out of a window, symbolizing their rejection of his authority. The defenestration of Prague marked the beginning of the Bohemian Revolt. The primarily Protestant northern Bohemian states sought to break away from the empire, fragmenting an already loosely structured realm. They formed alliances with the Protestant Union states in Germany. At the same time, Ferdinand II sought support from his Catholic nephew, King Philip IV of Spain. Battles erupted across the land, and armies clashed in a brutal struggle for dominance. The conflict expanded beyond the empire's borders, with Ottoman Empire soldiers fighting alongside the Bohemians against the Poles who supported the Habsburgs. To the west, the Spanish army aligned with the Catholic League, a coalition of Catholic nations in present-day Germany, Belgium, and France, who supported Ferdinand II. The initial successes of Ferdinand's forces led to the dissolution of the Protestant Union, causing the scales to tip in favor of the Catholic cause. In 1630, the Kingdom of Sweden was led by the legendary Protestant Gustavus Adolphus. The Swedes pushed back against the Catholic forces and reclaimed lost territory. Under Gustavus Adolphus's leadership, the Protestant victories continued. Yet, tragedy struck when Gustavus Adolphus fell in the Battle of Lutzen in 1632. The Swedes wavered, their resolve shaken. The war ended in a stalemate, with the only decisive fact that 8 million people died in this war. This started to lead many to question the power of this religion. Thinkers like John Locke argued that individuals possessed an inherent right to life. Sir Isaac Newton was discovering gravity and how gravitational force works. Sir Francis Bacon began the process known as the scientific method, a systematic approach to investigating the world. In 1707, the Acts of Union were passed, merging England and Scotland into a single political entity called Great Britain. However, Scotland faced protests and uprisings following the Union, including the Jacobite risings of 1715 and 1745, which sought to restore the Scottish monarchy and independence, though they were both unsuccessful. In 1756, tensions erupted between Austria and Germany over the disputed territory of Silesia, which caused the legendary 7 Years' War. The Austrian Empress Maria Theresa sought to regain control over Silesia, which Germany had seized during the War of the Austrian Succession. In response to the Austrian threat, German Frederick the Great launched a preemptive invasion of Saxony. Frederick's audacious move caught the attention of other European powers. France, seeing an opportunity to weaken its longtime rival Austria, allied with Prussia. On the other side, Russia, Sweden, and eventually Austria formed a coalition against Prussia and its newfound ally, France. The stage was set for a brutal and complex conflict engulfing the continent. Frederick's tactical brilliance allowed him to hold off his adversaries. In the Battle of Zorndorf, he led his forces to a costly victory against the Russians. Despite facing overwhelming odds, Frederick's skillful maneuvering and disciplined troops allowed him to repel multiple coalition offensives. The war raged on, with both sides experiencing victories and setbacks. By 1760, Germany's situation seemed dire, with its territories occupied, its economy strained, and Frederick's forces stretched thin. However, with British subsidies and reinforcements, Frederick managed to turn the tide again. In 1762, the sudden death of Empress Elizabeth of Russia and the ascension of the more sympathetic Catherine II led to a change in Russia's stance. Catherine, desiring to end the war and secure her position as ruler, withdrew Russian forces from the conflict, leaving Prussia to face a weakened coalition. Finally, in 1763, the war ended with the signing of the Treaty of Hubertusburg and the Treaty of Paris. The treaties reaffirmed the status quo ante bellum, restoring most pre-war territorial boundaries. Silesia remained under German control, and Austria, though unable to regain the territory, focused on reorganizing its military and administration. In 1769, Scottish engineer James Watt redefined how to travel by introducing the steam engine. Watt invented a condenser that allowed steam to be condensed in a separate chamber, reducing heat loss and increasing the engine's power and efficiency, kicking off the Industrial Revolution. As the 7 Years' War was ending, the global influence of the Europeans was crumbling. In 1780, José Gabriel Tupac Amaru II led an indigenous uprising against Spanish colonial rule, which was quickly crushed. In 1783, the 13 British colonies revolted from England. The French began their revolution in 1789 as people rose against the monarchy, electing Robespierre as their leader in 1791 in the French colony of Saint-Domingue, present-day Haiti. While in 1798, Irish nationalists staged a coup to free themselves against British rule, which failed. People would no longer be content with